right, guys. Welcome to the Trial Site News podcast. We are here with Dr. Robert Malone for the second podcast that he's doing. Thank you, Dr. Malone, for joining.
My pleasure.
And the topic is censorship in the age of COVID, basically censorship of scientific dissent, scientific debate. And Dr. Malone is kind of like a perfect case study when it comes to censorship. Unfortunately, there's been several kind of times you've been censored. So I guess maybe let's go back to the first time you experienced censorship, which was in February of 2020.
I think it was in like early April. It was, I think, the 5th edition of the book. So thanks for that lead in and that softball pitch, Aaron. So the story starts with, and please understand, fellow travelers, that I've been through a bunch of outbreaks and I've never experienced anything like this before. And I get that feedback from my scientific and medical colleagues left and right. None of us have ever seen anything like what's going on right now. And I'm not sure why, what the emergent phenomena is that Brett Weinstein speaks of that's leading us into this position. But I can for sure give you a random walk through time of COVID and a bunch of kind of case studies of how I've seen it manifest. So the first one that Aaron led in goes back to a book that my wife primarily wrote. I edited and helped with, but she was the driver. I was busy trying to do molecular docking and trying to figure out drugs that could be useful for COVID. The story, the truth is, I got a call from a, let's say, colleague who was in Wuhan, an American citizen that was in Wuhan in the fourth quarter of 2019, who was very aware of intelligence in that area. And he called me, and this is somebody that I've published with over the last 10 years multiple times. He called me from Wuhan in the first week, and he said, Robert, you got to get your team spun up because this virus is going to be a problem. So time frame, again, reset. This is the first week in January of 2020. And the gentleman's been in country for a few months now at that point. So I get this call, and on the 10th, the virus sequence gets published as the Wuhan seafood market virus. And I get going on drug docking, molecular modeling, and all that cool computer stuff, trying to screen drug libraries for repurposing purposes. Jill, my wife, PhD in biotechnology and public policy, and my co-worker through multiple pandemics, says, hey, I know what I can do, because we're both scratching our heads. What can we do to help the world and help our colleagues, the people around us, to get ready for this thing that they hardly even know exists? And is, you're not hearing about it in the press yet. Now just to reel back in time, remember, the documents show that the US government was well aware. And remember, this is a US government civil servant, let's say, that called me from Wuhan. So the government was well aware of what was going on there at that point in time. So Jill gets going, and she says, well, what I can do is I can use Amazon self-publishing, and I can quickly get out a paperback that can help people prepare for this and get their affairs in order and understand what the virus represents and just make sense out of all this. And so she writes a book that's about 100 pages long after we finish it that has all kinds of nitty-gritties about the nature of the virus, its replication, goes through the virology, goes through what's known about things like masks and what the data are and the studies on use of masks, what was known about prior coronaviruses and the prior SARS virus, what we're likely to be encountering, what you would need to do to protect yourself, how you would have to clean your house, and even has chapters suggesting that you might want to start a garden and things like that. The people ended up doing just naturally, organically. It was fascinating. So she wrote a general book, and she tried to strike a tone. It's like, we live, just some context, we live on a 50-acre horse farm in a red county in a purple state here in Virginia. So we talk to folks from all walks of life and from all political persuasions. We don't just selectively talk to people like us. Even if we had wanted to, we wouldn't. And the book was written with that in mind, to be a vehicle to share information and help protect our fellow colleagues, people, you know, in our lives, in the supermarket, at the feed store and places like that. So that's the tone that we struck. But it was solidly researched and actually referenced, all the proper reference managers. And she got it up and published on Amazon in the first week in February, which was a heroic effort. I mean, less than a month from when we got the call from the colleague in Wuhan to a 100-page published book about how to protect yourself. The virus didn't even have a name then, so we called it the novel coronavirus 2019. So she got the book out, and we elected to, Amazon self-publishing will recommend to you pricing structures and options that you have for self-publishing these paperbacks, and they print them and then send them out and all that stuff. So they get their nickel on everything, believe me. So we just kind of clicked through and selected the lower pricing for an Amazon self-published book and didn't think twice about it. And we got a couple checks, you know, $300 here, $500 there. And then all of a sudden, and Jill's thinking has been that she's going to periodically update this thing. That's one of the nice things about self-publishing, is she can quickly put out updated editions. And so she ends up at about edition 5. And then suddenly she gets a notice from Amazon that the book is being deleted and dropped off of their list. And they have standard policies, written policies about, you know, what happens, it's just like the community standard guidelines that we see with the other large internet related companies. And so we read those policies and we're scratching our head. We haven't done anything wrong here. You know, we didn't attack anybody, or, you know, there's no porn or any of that, unless you call it virus porn. Yeah, right. That's pretty twisted.
A little twisted.
So there it is. It's all twisted. So we get deleted. And so she writes to them multiple times, and they have a policy that they will let you know what you've done wrong so that you have a chance to correct it, but they won't provide any information about what was done wrong. And so she asked them, you know, what have we done wrong? Do we have any appeal? No, that's it. There's no appeal, no explanation. You're out. So that was the first one. And you can appreciate that, you know, for Jill, she busted her can for a month to get this out in an honest effort, you know, not seeking profit, to get information out to our friends and colleagues. And then it is summarily, and, you know, dropped a month of her life working full time, flat out, to get this done. And poof, it's gone. No recourse, nothing.
So, Dr. Malone,
that was episode number 1.
Episode number 1. Do either you or your wife have any idea to this day why that book was removed from Amazon, or theories?
So one can only speculate. But what she did was, because she was a little bit aggravated, as you might be if you'd put a month of labor into this and then suddenly had it pulled. And so she hunted down, there was a meeting in the White House with Amazon and others in which there was an agreement that the large internet companies were going to, at the behest of the White House, remember this was the last POTUS, at the behest of the White House, they were going to censor information that they deemed as counter to the dominant narrative. So this logic of, we're not going to let information go into circulation that we perceive as counter to the dominant narrative that we want to put out at that particular time, that became public policy in about April. And she tracked it through some Washington Post articles that discuss this and discuss these meetings. And she's documented all that, and we can send it to you, Aaron, or to Trial Site News as a PDF if you want. So that is kind of where that ended up, is that was apparently the genesis of this thread of internet-based censorship and tech-based censorship that traces back to about March, April of 2020. And I think, I only speculate, you know, and there'll be parts of this viewership that disagree with this, but Jill dove into the literature, the peer-reviewed literature on mask use,
right,
and pulled out that literature, because we've been, you know, biotech researchers for years, run tissue culture rooms. She used to work with non-human primates, which have a nasty habit of sharing their own viruses with their keepers, etc. And mask use is just the norm in that environment, if you want to keep viruses from entering your nose and infecting you in your mouth. So she pulled the peer-reviewed literature, cited it, and she advised that the people reading the book should get N95 masks and should use them when they go out in public as part of their standard procedure, in addition to hand washing and other things. I think that we got pulled in that window of time where Dr. Fauci decided that the proper messaging was to say, don't use masks. If anything, use a bandana. You may recall that there was messaging that masks don't work then. And the Washington Post letters that were FOIA'd have come out now saying that he knew at that time that that wasn't true, that masks in fact did work. And he was putting out the messaging that they didn't work because he was afraid of the hit on the supply chain for masks for public health providers and physicians and frontline personnel. I think we may have gotten deleted because of that. That's pure speculation, but if you read through the book, most people that look at it go, this is a nothing burger.
Yeah,
There's nothing here.
I did go through the book. I was going through it to like, where is it? Where is the part where
where's the salacious stuff?
Right, where exactly. But yeah, and I think that's I mean, and I work in public health, and I think I know people feel strongly about masks, but I think that's part of my biases against censorship. I know people in public health think differently than me on that part, but I think I'm pro scientific debate, getting stuff out there. I'm pro scientific dissent, and informing people so they can make their own health decisions. That's probably my own bias. I know people disagree with me on that. And that's the same thing with masks. I think it's important for people to hear all sides of that debate, as we know it became a very hotly
contentious issue.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah,
a little bit.
And that's where we were coming from, was just to inform people.
Yeah.
So they can be empowered.
Yeah.
And in this, we knew that this was going to cause. I mean, we went through Ebola together.
Right.
We know we've been through a bunch of these outbreaks. We know the kind of tending towards mass hysteria that can happen.
Yeah.
We were just trying to help people.
Right, right.
By
And I
giving
agree.
them
I mean,
information.
I think, yeah, just providing people information, even information that they may disagree with or not like, but letting them ultimately be, you know, the decision makers of what, you know, what to do with their own health choices.
I can tell you in this red county, back then, there was a lot of derision, you know, almost snickers at us for advocating masks. And when we talked to our local Southern States distributor and told them they ought to get a shipment of N95s in, they were like, what are you talking about? Are you crazy?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they, you know, time passed, but so that was episode number 1. So that kind of establishes that this willingness to censor information goes back pretty early in this, and it was coordinated through the White House initially, for sure.
Because I think do you want to talk a little bit about the Frontiers article? Because I think that is also an example, I would say, of censorship. But it was an article on Pepsid and Celebrex, is that right? Or maybe there was other drugs in there.
But before then, it was the I word, right?
Right.
The word that shall not be said on YouTube. Right?
Ivermectin. Yeah. And I know the subscribers, many of the subscribers feel very strongly about ivermectin, but there was that article that was also pulled from Frontiers.
So that was the one that kicked it off.
Okay.
So I'll share the story.
Okay.
So I made the assessment on behalf of the group that I was working with, which we were working under a DoD contract for identifying repurposed drugs for countermeasures for organophosphates. That's a fancy word for chemical warfare agents of the type used in World War I, and they're still around. So we were looking for new drugs and repurposed drugs for organophosphates using all the latest cool tech. And we kind of, this hit the fan, and we all said, hey, looks like a big one, let's get going. And we just started working as volunteers. And we had been assembled under a DoD contract for another purpose. So that's how that got going. And as we progressed, there's, the story of the discovery of famotidine is an interesting tangent we won't go into, and what happened after that, and Rick Bright and all those things. But then it comes down to the point where we need to start publishing our work. And the work started with the initial famotidine discovery and a big coalition that was bicoastal, top universities, Harvard, Duke, UCSF, a bunch of big shots about the mechanism of action of famotidine. The generic term for famotidine is Pepsid. And please understand, viewers, I am not here to pump the drugs that we have an open IND for and are about to bring into the clinic. So that's not my objective, and I differ from some others in my willingness to advocate for things early on in terms of repurposed drugs. But I'll mention the name. So it was famotidine, which is Pepsid, this drug that people take for heartburn. But it also happens to be a profoundly potent and active blocker of histamine H2 receptor. And what we came to understand in those early days was that a key part of the hyperinflammatory response of COVID involves histamine as a messenger and activation of mast cells and other things. So we did this large body of work, wrote the paper, and then just could not get it published to save our lives. Just rejection after rejection, in a way that this is a solid paper with top tier researchers, people that are in the National Academy of Sciences, and we can't get it published. And we get ridiculed on Associated Press for our work as a team. And you can look those articles up, and ridiculed by BARDA for wanting to do clinical trials involving this. And we can't get the work published. We put it up on a preprint server, and it kind of pegs the needle. Not as much as Pierre Corey's review paper on ivermectin did, but for the time frame, it got a lot of attention, and a lot of scientists and physicians took that as the starting point for what then was heresy and now is an accepted wisdom, that this disease is a hyperinflammatory disease, that it involves mast cells and histamine signaling. So couldn't get the paper published. Well-written paper, from top-tier people. And this goes on, and I'm on a teleconference with some researchers from Europe, Spain, France, Italy, and others, that are talking about some of their clinical data where they've tested out a histamine H1 receptor blocker. So this is their 4 different histamine receptors. Famotidine hits H2. There's others that hit H1. And they're also talking about how wicked hard it is to get anything published involving repurposed drugs. So we all agree. One of them chimes up and says, hey, there's this journal in Switzerland called Frontiers, and I've worked with them before. I'm actually an editor. This is Maria Cristini speaking from Italy. And she's a full professor at a major Italian medical school. And she says, well, why don't we set up a special topic edition for repurposed drugs in Frontiers in Pharmacology. And then we'll have a natural home. So we go through this whole process of writing specifications and scope, and it gets reviewed by Frontiers editorial staff, and they bless it. So they say, okay, we will publish this. Thank you very much. You get to be the editors of this journal, of this particular volume. And yes, please solicit journal articles that involve repurposed drugs for COVID. And so we proceed to solicit articles from all over the world that we think make sense and move them through peer review and get them accepted into this journal, which you have to pay for in order to get your paper published there because it's open source. So it has the advantage, it's open source, anybody can read it. It's got a lot of good there. This all goes about its merry way until I catch wind of ivermectin and the potential efficacy of ivermectin. And this comes, I don't remember, Aaron, you might have even been involved in some, in connecting me in this. Or it was a journalist. I think it was a journalist.
Not sure.
Helen, yeah, it was a journalist at Vanity Fair that said, hey, Robert, have you heard about this ivermectin story? That I was supporting her on another article. And so she said, Catherine Eben. She said, hey, let me put you in touch with a pediatrician that I know that knows all about this since you haven't heard about it. That pediatrician opens the door for me into the whole ivermectin community, including Pierre Corey and Andy Hill back in Leeds in the UK, who's doing the meta-analysis together with Tess Laurie. And I'm leading this big team of drug repurposing people working for the Department of Defense. And I open a dialogue with these folks and they send me their information and I look at it and I say, you know what, this is a viable candidate. It has, ivermectin was one that we'd identified for Zika and for yellow fever as a candidate when I had started a company doing repurposing for Zika. And ivermectin is an interesting drug. It's very safe. It has this amazing safety record, 40 years of use. And the molecular modeling suggested in yellow fever that it would dock to a key protein. And in this case, but I knew that ivermectin had a fundamental problem with all of these antiviral indications, which is that in order to measure inhibition of virus replication in cell culture, you have to have a level of ivermectin that's so high that it's kind of beyond the toxic range for human administration. And so even though it works at a level that's too high for safe administration to humans. And this is the problem with ivermectin conceptually with COVID. But Pierre and Andy showed me these data coming out that looked to me pretty compelling. Something was going on here. It didn't make sense, but it seemed to be working clinically. So I advocated that Peter would take this crude review that he'd written that was out on the web and tune it up and submit it for this journal. And so he did. And I knew at that point that there was some pushback starting about ivermectin, and it was increasingly controversial. And so I collected 4 highly qualified reviewers. One was a senior safety officer who was working for the DoD, who used to work for AstraZeneca as a drug safety officer. You know, near the end of his career, highly qualified guy. Another one was a frontline emergency physician working at Montefiore in the Bronx, right? So this is Albert Einstein. So he would provide, I thought he could provide a good clinical perspective from the review. 2 of them were senior people from the FDA. One is one of the FDA's most senior reviewers. The other is a senior scientist. She's an MD. So 4 highly qualified reviewers. I get it through peer review. Pierre gets raked over the coals, has to rewrite it 3 or 4 times. And then it gets accepted. And the abstract gets posted on Frontiers in Pharmacology as an upcoming paper. And that's when the problem starts. Within a couple of days, it hits a stupidly high number of hits. People are hitting on this thing. Pierre has notified people through the FLCCC that this thing is coming. It's accepted. It's getting an amazing number of hits. I don't remember how many it hit. It was, like within a day, it was well over 100,000. And then I get a call from the editor-in-chief of Frontiers. And basically, I get called on the carpet as the editor who is handling this thing. And he tells me that he has had a call from a biostatistician who objects to this paper, that it's not well written. This is exactly the same story as the vaccine paper that just got rejected, by the way. And one of the people that wrote that paper just lost his job. So, yeah.
I didn't know about that
one. Yeah,
one.
this is the paper that had the punchline. You have 2 die from vaccination for every 3 protected. This is based on Dutch and Israeli.
I remember that paper. Yeah.
Yeah, that was then retracted after a group of academic biostatisticians attacked it directly with the journal after it had passed peer review. In that case, a good case we made that the peer review was not adequate. In this case, the peer review was bomb-proof. It was 4 highly qualified individuals, and I get called on the carpet with the editor-in-chief, who tells me that it has too many authors. The authors have never published before. They're not qualified. It has statistically incorrect conclusions. What's odd about that is the abstract didn't have any statistics in it. So whoever was making this conclusion, the anonymous biostatistician, there wasn't any biostats in the abstract that they were criticizing because the paper wasn't out yet. And so too many authors, not qualified as authors, biostats are wrong. Pierre inserted the FLCCC treatment protocol in the discussion part of the paper. And so there was an objection that he was trying to somehow backdoor that in as a peer-reviewed protocol. And furthermore, he didn't like Pierre's tone. When he had talked, Pierre is a pretty florid New York guy and that can get a little hot under the collar, and he doesn't deny that. And he had been frustrated with how long it was taking the journal to get it published. At this point, he's already paid for the publication. It's already formatted, okay? He's paid, it's formatted, it's past peer review, and somebody calls the editor-in-chief. The editor-in-chief calls me to the carpet, and I say to him, Fred, well, why don't you just let Pierre revise it? If you've got these objections, and you think that he's overselling it in the abstract, and he's put this protocol in the end, and you think some of these authors don't belong there, then why don't you just let him revise it, and we can publish it, and everything will be fine. No, can't do that because Pierre has offended Fred's sensibilities by the tone of voice that he used with his staff. And so that's what gets it kicked out and delayed for another month and a half to get published. So that then triggered the Frontiers to do an audit of the entire volume and everything that was
okay.
And that includes my paper on famotidine and celecoxib.
Okay.
It's been reviewed by an independent person.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, that independent editor, it's now passed through peer review. It's actually passed through peer review twice. And the independent editor just writes some crazy stuff about why it should be rejected. Well, the patients were treated with vitamin C, and we can't rule out that the vitamin C wasn't what made it so that none of them died in the hospital after they had hospitalized COVID, instead of the famotidine and celecoxib. It was just totally specious arguments. But and he was an Italian, and the other Italians that were co-editors wrote to him, et cetera, but he was just dug in. There was no way that he was going to let this thing get published. And in the end, and they raised objections about other papers that were perfectly normal.
Yeah.
And so the editors, the group that had created this thing, just decided to resign in protest.
Right.
And we were immediately deleted from any ability to ever serve as editors again. So there was a retaliation component.
Jeez.
And we
and
were
don't come
in
back.
the journal. And yeah, don't come back. Don't let the door hit you in the back on the way out. You know, and your mother too. So just
you and your horse, which actually applies in your case.
Yeah. And so it goes. And I then what I've experienced with that same paper that now has been through actually peer review 3 times and been accepted, except by the senior editor with 6 different reviewers. Then I submit it to a journal that had previously said, yeah, we would love to have that submitted. And what comes back is, well, this seems to be the new way to say no without saying no. It's not within the scope of our journal. Now, previously, the editor-in-chief had said it's absolutely within the scope of the journal, and please send it in. Then this is with the Springer, I think it is, has a system now where if you get rejected from one journal, they will advise you on the other journal to submit. And so we get this letter from Springer saying, well, they thought it wasn't appropriate for their journal, but here's others on our list that we think is appropriate. Absolutely. And so we submit to the best of those, and a month goes by. Now, each of these things takes a month, 2 months, and a month goes by, and we get a letter saying, well, we've decided that it's outside of scope, and we can't accept it for review, which was explicitly what the interlocutor had said was, well, these journals are all within scope, and you can submit it here. And then we get back, no, it's outside of scope and we can't even consider it. So that particular paper, we then submitted to another journal, and it's been in review now. Remember, it's been peer reviewed 3 times, and it sat within the Journal of Pharmacology and Pulmonary Pharmacology and Therapeutics. And it's been there over 3 months in review with nothing. So that's what all of us are encountering. See, the thing is, this isn't a story just of us. And remember, this isn't a bunch of whack job crazies. This is the U.S. Department of Defense that has sponsored all this work, right? We have in the footer all the proper labels for it. Well, that was another thing I got kicked for, was I hadn't properly disclosed conflict of interest. So I had to write this huge, long conflict of interest statement, which basically says I have no conflict of interest. And that's another one of the new things that everybody's doing in these journals. Yeah. So it still remains unpublished. Fortunately, it's up on a preprint server,
so people
can look at it. And it's that the parent one for that repeatedly wins top 10 publications on the SSRI server, but we cannot get it in a journal.
I just want to say, I wanted to let you take a lot of time to explain that whole story, because I think it's so important for people to understand the details and what is going on.
You're kind.
Yeah. And I know sometimes people are like, oh, hurry up, you're taking too long. But I think to me, this is such a big problem. And the other problem I have with this is the complacency, with this type of censorship. And I think people need to at least be aware of it and to
so if I can say to your ivermectin fans, here's something for you to take home with.
The subscribers. There's a lot of ivermectin fans.
With the objections that the data are not peer reviewed and published for ivermectin. Problem with that argument is that it is almost impossible to get anything involving repurposed drugs, let alone anything that has the I word, published through peer review. And so to criticize the fact that these studies in, whether it's Tess Lurie or Andy Hill's meta-analysis, aren't published and peer-reviewed, that's a circular argument, because in this day and age, for some crazy reason, you cannot get repurposed drugs published relating to COVID. You can get other stuff through, but not repurposed drugs. So that's example number 2. Then we come to the present, right?
Yeah, let's come to the present, but let's first mention, because this ties into how we're going to talk about LinkedIn, because you were censored, you were kicked off of the LinkedIn platform, and then you were reinstated with the help of someone. And I think that's important to point out, because not everybody has connections to LinkedIn. Like,
there's no way.
Right.
Yes. So I was deleted and ghosted from a LinkedIn account that I built over 15 years. That's crucial for me running my consulting business.
Right. Because that's what people use LinkedIn for.
Yeah, that's what it's there for.
Yeah.
It's a professional network.
Right.
And it has basically all my bona fides of prior outbreaks and pictures from the WHO and everything else. So gone, no warning, just deleted, flushed. And I start getting phone calls from my professional contacts from all over the world saying, Robert, what the heck happened?
Right.
So that's kind of weird. And so what did happen and what resolved it? You're exactly right. There's no way that the average person,
right.
I'm now sitting
average scientist.
Last I checked, I'm now sitting with 94,000 Twitter followers. I'm not bragging, it's just the truth. And in this world of new media, your Twitter subscriber account is almost like Bitcoin currency. It conveys all kinds of things.
Right.
And media companies respect what that means, and podcasters do.
Yeah.
So I get deleted. I put notice out on Twitter. There's this huge groundswell of protest. People start canceling their LinkedIn accounts.
Right.
They're writing to LinkedIn complaining about it. And it goes all the way to one of the mainstream publications. So I guess it's akin to like the LA Times in Italy, publishes an extensive article about this censorship and my little account getting cut off of LinkedIn with all of my 6,000 LinkedIn followers. And for some reason, this makes a major splash in the Italian press because it's emblematic of what's going on, and because I have this CV and credibility of having had a role in the invention, at the very earliest days, arguably being the original inventor of RNA vaccine technology. So I have the credibility, the CV, all this, and all of this action going on from the Twitter followers. And also Steve Kirsch, Silicon Valley entrepreneur with a 20-year history of philanthropic work in medical affairs, happens to know the vice president of LinkedIn. And when I first got deleted, he calls him up and he says, what's going on with Malone? I don't get it. In the end, I get a very nice apology letter. I didn't think I was going to get that from LinkedIn, but it didn't come from LinkedIn. It came from the vice president personally. Again, that would never happen. But along the way, what was bizarre? What was the inciting event? What was the trigger that made them decide that they needed to, off with his head? And all I can say is a temporal association. Any of us thinking about COVID and data are all hyper aware that just because there's an association in time, it doesn't mean causation, right? This is the VAERS database problem. But the day before I get kicked off, my wife pulls up this. I'm getting fact checked by Reuters and PolitiFact and smeared. Basically, they take my words, twist them, set up a strawman, and then prove that the strawman's wrong. And then suddenly the trolls and everybody else starts attacking me for lying.
Yeah, and we're going to touch on that too, because I think that's important because that's what LinkedIn used as one of their Reuters fact checks.
That was their my top offense was that I outed the chairman of Reuters board for conflict of interest.
Jim Smith.
And I did it actually gently because he also sits on the Pfizer board.
Right.
And then my other offenses were basically that I had quoted from the Wall Street Journal editorial that raised questions about the safety of the vaccines. So I guess we can't quote the Wall Street Journal. And
that was
that I
written
was
by
complaining about censorship.
That was written by an epidemiologist, right? Out of
And a senior physician.
And it's right.
Well respected,
right.
Academics.
Right.
They were qualified. So in the Wall Street Journal, I mean, no matter what you think of the Wall Street Journal, it is one of the major papers of record in the entire United States.
Right.
So those were my sins. Wall Street Journal outing the director of Reuters for conflict of interest, and complaining about censorship. So I got censored for complaining about censorship. And the most bizarre thing of all was that the header in the summary of my transgressions was misspelled. So it wasn't like a template or something, it was somebody custom put this thing together and sent it over to me, and didn't even run it through the spell checker. So the whole thing was bizarre and fascinating and telling.
I thought what was interesting too, and this is a point that I bring up a lot in the work I do in public health, where LinkedIn, which is great that they sent you an apology letter, because a lot of organizations don't own that.
They don't.
And I know
YouTube
YouTube
just
doesn't.
cuts you off, and that's that.
But I mean, but like I said, you had Steve's help, and the average person doesn't have that. So there might be people out there who have been deleted for expressing scientific dissent, and they can't get reinstated. Right. So
they write to me.
Right. And then the fact that you were deleted, and then that deters other people who might have concerns or want to challenge certain parts of a narrative from doing so, because they don't want to lose their profiles, or worse yet, get silenced.
So somebody, now that I'm getting all this data feed from people all over the world, somebody writes to me about the Trusted News Initiative, and suddenly everything kind of clicks. And then we learn that LinkedIn is tied in with YouTube, and with Twitter and Reuters and Associated Press and AFP in France, and the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the British Broadcasting Corporation, etc., within this structure that was set up, this coalition of Western media and big tech, Google, Facebook, that is originally set up to counter disinformation, political disinformation around elections, keep interference from foreign countries in domestic elections. That was the whole purpose. And a new leader came into the BBC last fall and decided that it was going to be his thing, his contribution to humanity, that he was going to provide leadership, and they were going to turn the ship on this whole thing and focus it on disinformation relating to the vaccines. And they defined disinformation as anything not aligned with whatever is the official statements coming from World Health Organization, CDC, NIH, EMA, local authorities, or the World Health Organization. And so you are within the scope of that. Includes Washington Post.
I wouldn't even agree with that definition, but because disinformation and misinformation are two. There's two.
Totally different.
They're different, right? Right.
Yeah, but that's if you say words that are not aligned with the narrative coming from World Health Organization or these other things, then you are by definition spreading false information.
Right.
And you will be censored, deleted, throttled, not able. I don't know if any of you on Facebook have found that if you type in ivermectin and COVID, whatever you post, number one, you'll immediately get flagged. Number two, that post will not be shared with anyone else. It's dead.
And that's happened to me on my just trying to just share an article to hear what people think about it. You can't do it. But I think what's interesting too about the person, I think it was someone from LinkedIn's member safety committee, and they said, well, either you're right or Reuters is right. I don't know which one is right. And it almost sounded like frustration And then I looked at the Reuters fact check because I wanted to see how they were doing that. And just to, so where was it? Where they said vaccines are not cytotoxic, that it's, they were saying that they were not, but then they were identifying you. And I thought it was so strange. Not only did they not ask you for your opinion, but they didn't identify you as a doctor or anything. They just identified you as one of three individuals sitting on this podcast.
Yeah.
And I said to myself,
Yeah.
that's so strange, because if I was fact checking, I'd want to know who this person was and what their history was and what their credentials were. And for someone like Reuters, which is a huge organization, to not do that and then call that a fact check.
So we ran that to ground.
Yeah.
And Reuters uses two different organizations. One is at McGill University in Canada, and the other one is based in the UK. The UK one is the parent group. They're run by a social scientist who's got a bachelor's degree in I forget, sociology or something like that. No technical background. So what we've got is this, as you pointed out, Aaron, you should tell this story. You're the one that smoked it out. Tell us about what you found out about Reuters fact-checking process and who's running the shop.
Well, okay, I don't know the specifics, but I did find a woman, her name Hazel Baker, and she was in charge of this new fact-checking thing, and she's supposedly very good at it, and she might very well be. I don't know much about her, but I went to her Twitter feed, and she obviously was very involved in kind of controlling misinformation and disinformation around COVID-19. And I said, well, this might be a good person for Dr. Malone to know about or contact, because I don't think you were contacted to comment at all on that fact check. Is that right?
Well,
so I would have, if I was fact checking you, I probably would have said, hey, well, let me just call this guy and at least get his opinion.
Yeah. It's not like people have trouble calling me these days.
Right. Yeah. You're inundated with calls. But then, and I said, and then you reached out to this person, which I thought was a really nice thing to do when somebody is, like does something that may you're trying to discredit you. And then you got sort of like a standard response back, like a form response, like you have to write this generic this generic email address. And I said, wow, I would be willing to like have her on the show, or anybody that does that fact checking, just to understand what they're thinking and doing, because I think that you were very much wronged in that process.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm a big boy, and I'm used to the internet. So in the scope of nasty things that get said to me by trolls, what Reuters said was un poquito.
I know, but I think like when people go there, like traditional institutions go there and rely on them as, or like the mainstream.
Well, or they rely on Wikipedia.
Right.
And that's the other part of the story that is
that's another
latest.
podcast.
Yeah. There is some serious, there's a phrase used in Europe called historical negationism. That sounds very intellectual, doesn't it? It's writing people out of history. And a good case can be made that I've been well and truly written out.
Yeah.
And we can talk about who's driving that, and it's hard to trace it. But
I'm
you're
working
right,
on that.
You get labeled. So to just follow the thread. So Reuters comes out with their thing. PolitiFact comes out with their thing. They're clearly wrong. I mean, it takes me 3 clicks to pull up the peer-reviewed literature. But immediately some journalist in training takes those and writes a smear piece and posts it. And Jill, my wife, Googles my name from time to time just to keep her finger on what's going on the internet and what my haters are saying. And up pops this thing way high in the Google search, written by this, journalist in training who's working for a website, but it's being promoted. And she then writes to the website that has paid this young man and says, basically, what the heck is going on here? But meanwhile, it's getting cited all over as evidence that I'm a fraud and I don't know what I'm talking about, and blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on. eventually I contact the young man and I say, and Jill contacts his employer and says, this isn't right. And it immediately gets pulled down, and the young man is quite indignant. But I explained to him that there is a larger context, and he, as a journalism student, he may wish to think about understanding the context of these fact checkers and not just take them at face value, and maybe go and look for the primary sources. But I guess that's the new journalism, is everybody wants things pre-canned, and they don't take the time to go back and do the primary work anymore. That's what I'm hearing is the new norm in mainstream media that we're all kind of complaining about.
Well, yeah, I mean, and like I said, I'd be happy to hear somebody's side of their story from mainstream media too, just to hear, because that's why I like this outlet, because I think it allows for people with different views to share, whether you agree or you don't agree. You can always respectfully present your side of a story, of a topic. But that's not really happening. But anyways, Dr. Malone, did you want to, I mean, it's almost, there's like 3 minutes left in this hour. So is there anything else you'd like to add?
So how to do a wrap up? That I can tell you, I can tell you for sure. So one example, the Europeans have been contacting me like crazy. I mentioned this Italian article. They're really worried about what's happening. And I'm getting examples of physicians in Canada losing their job, scientists losing their job. French physicians are not allowed to, they can't use ivermectin. That's basically a crime. And today, unverified, I got the report that in Spain, physicians that run counter to the narrative, raise questions about vaccine safety, or wish to use alternative strategies like ivermectin, are being put in mental institutions. They're not just losing their ability to practice.
What?
Yeah.
Where?
So
what?
you can be Spain. You can be determined to be crazy if you don't comport with the narrative.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So in Europe, and there is a piece out there now that I've posted on Twitter and whatever that's official from the European Union. The censorship in Europe is going to get more stringent. This is not, we're not to the end point yet.
Wow, that is really scary. That is like, that's insane. I mean, that is insane. That is insane. Those people are not insane. That policy is insane. Wow, I did not know that. But I think people need to wake up. Like I said, I'm biased. I'm very against censorship. And I don't think that, I just don't think that's what we're about. And it's anti-science to like not allow debate and dissent to me, like, because dissent, right? Like science has been tweaked over the years because people ask questions and make comments. So it's weird. I don't know what's behind this, but wow.
But it's got some bad juju, doesn't it? So there's my closing.
Yeah. I guess you're lucky if you've only gotten deleted from LinkedIn and not put into some institution.
Well, so that's the stick's head thing is I'm lucky. I'm basically privileged.
Wow.
That's the truth of it. Because of my CV and because of the history with RNA, I'm being allowed to say things on the edge, but I've been notified that I could once again lose my LinkedIn account at any moment. But I'm able to say some things that other people are immediately getting deleted for.
Yeah.
And it's only because I have friends in high places and I have a certain degree of status and a big Twitter following. But for everybody else,
I feel like the Queen of Hearts, it's like has taken over, like off with his head. It's crazy.
Through the looking glass is one of the metaphors that people are using a lot.
Oh, interesting. That's really interesting. Through the looking glass, huh?
Yeah, you went there when you said Queen of Hearts.
I did, yeah. I mean, I Lewis Carroll. I
it
know
was subconscious.
Yes, it was, and I know there's Lewis Carroll. His mother might have had borderline personality disorder and all the different female characters.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a book on it, I think. But anyways, that was a random tangent. Thank you, Dr. Malone. That was eye-opening, and I'm glad that you're able to share that. I think it's really important that people hear it.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for the chat. I look forward to our next one.
Absolutely. Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, you too.